Hello guys, welcome back to another exciting Naruto fanfiction. Heart. If you're enjoying this series, don't forget to hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more amazing Naruto, which is What If Naruto Became a Genius Using Shadow Clones Part 1. Now let's start the fanfic. Naruto Uzumaki was not a person who punished harshly. He'd had a harsh life, true, but he'd always looked for the bright side of things. Moaning about your problems never did anything about them, and brought you no closer to your goals. When possible, he turned the other cheek, else he pranked. This was how he was. His harsh life, however, had brought one thing: he was very defensive of those he called friends. He had very few of those, and before their pain his was nothing. So, knowing that, it can be said that the beating Naruto gave Mizuki, his old taijutsu teacher, was entirely in proportion with the crime. By Konoha law, the man was guilty of treason, so no one would be angry at Mizuki's death, but Naruto stayed his hand, or hands in this case, and left the man alive. Beaten to a bloody pulp, true, but alive. Hee. I went a little too far. Iruka. He turned around to talk to the second man he could call a friend, after the Sandaime. The Chunin was unmoving, his head having fallen back sometime while the many Narutos were beating on Mizuki. Iruka. Naruto had not listened much to his lessons in first aid, but nevertheless remembered some. His favorite instructor's temperature was not normal, and his breathing was slow. It was visible something was wrong with him. It took but a second for Naruto to call back his clones, though some had already left for his apartment as he'd instructed them to. They quickly gathered Iruka's body, making sure to step on Mizuki a few times along the way, and dashed from tree to tree holding his body aloft. Naruto could see the remaining clones gather Mizuki none to gently and follow him, but his mind was focused on getting Iruka to the hospital as soon as possible. When Naruto arrived to the hospital, the Hokage was already there, reinforcing Naruto's ingrained knowledge that the Sandaime always knew everything just as it happened and just let him do his pranks out of pleasure for the results. He was actually proud that his own technique had managed to knock the old man down for once. He'd normally be bragging about it by now, but he had more important things to do. Two medical ninjas stepped from behind the town leader as soon as the clones holding Iruka touched the ground, gathered the Chunin and brought him inside on a stretcher. Two of those weird masked ninja did the same with Mizuki's body, though these didn't bother with a stretcher. The one behind the crow mask even covered a snort when one of his clones gave him a last kick right between the legs, and Naruto counted every emotion he'd get from those people as a victory. They'd been checking him in his apartment for years, and they always seemed like moving stone statues for all feelings they showed. The Hokage stepped forward then, as the two masked ones were bouncing from roof to roof, and stopped a few meters in front of the mass of clones. Naruto drained the rest of his noodles in one great gulp, and walked with determination towards one of these clones, who was still savoring his own ramen. Unlatching the scroll, he quickly examined it. The Kage Bunshin directions were still there, and yes, another technique afterwards. If a single technique from that scroll could make him able to beat down a Chunin, imagine how much closer to Hokage he'd be with a dozen. Or maybe even more. Looking back at the clones still eating ramen, he realized he had no clue how long they'd last. Better off copying the techniques on other scrolls first. He probably didn't have time to train in a dozen before they'd disappeared, anyway. Dashing to his room, he came back holding on every single empty scroll he owned. It was quite a few. He'd never have thought that not doing his homework could be so useful. It left him with plenty of spare scrolls to write on, though. He'd barely started writing when the sound of slurping noodles behind him clued him to a much better and faster way of doing this. Hey you guys, stop eating. A few of his clones did stop, though the majority kept on. One even gave him the finger. He resisted the urge to burst that one, but held back as it was one with a scroll. I'm bursting the first one who hasn't finished his ramen in 10 seconds. The sounds of slurping noodles were a balm to Naruto's ears, and before long all clones were looking at him expectantly. It was good to be listened to. Okay. You and you, he said, pointing to the clone he'd taken the scroll from, and another clone, this one without a scroll. You're with me. The others in teams of 3, with 1 scroll per team. The one remaining. Naruto looked down at his pile of blank scrolls, then at the Forbidden Seals scroll. Nope. Probably not enough scrolls to copy down everything. You go buy some more scrolls and markers. Oh, and some more ramen while you're at it. He tossed his purse at that one, who was already out the door. Now, everyone call out the technique he's copying, since we don't need any duplicates. I've already started with Shiki Fujin, so I'm taking that one. The rest of you, go. The sun was rising in the eastern sky when the Naruto squad finished copying down the contents of the Forbidden Scroll. They worked all night, but Naruto wasn't really feeling tired. Probably because of all the ramen he'd just eaten. He'd been right to send a clone out to purchase stuff, as without that they'd have run out of scrolls before even hitting the second quarter of the Forbidden Seals, and would have run out of ramen not much later. And they'd at least needed a second marker each, too. Now that the copying was done, each Naruto was catching up on some others' things. Unsurprisingly, from half of them, that meant ramen. 2 others were sleeping, 3 were down on the scrolls, examining them and comparing them to the original, and 1 even decided to take a bath. Surprisingly, they all lasted up until now with no need to recreate any of them. Naruto was still wondering when they'd burst by themselves. He himself was rereading about the Kage Bunshin on the copy he'd made earlier. He'd mostly made it for completion's sake, but realized up by rereading that he'd barely glanced at half the scroll while training in the forest. Most of what he'd ignored was under the headings, dangers, and reasons of being forbidden. As such, he found himself struggling to understand the following passage. Else the danger of severe chakra depletion due to the technique's inerrant division process, the other danger is a form of psychic damage due to the return of a clone's secondary consciousness to the primary one, a form of mental overload due to excess information. As such, it is not recommended to use this technique for upwards of a dozen clones, due to the possibility of multiple memories returning simultaneously, harming the user's psyche and possibly causing personality disorders. He did understand the last phrase, but made no sense of it. He'd burst 100 or so clones in front of the hospital yesterday, and felt no adverse effect. But he didn't remember anything about memories returning or anything of that essence. He brought the matter to the 3 clones now nearly done with their verification, and as a group decided on a simple way of testing this effect. One of the copies grabbed Naruto's dictionary, whose normal use was propping up the kitchen table, opened it at a random page, looked at the first word he'd found there, then dropped the book on his foot, bursting himself. Incendiary. Incendiary, all the clones chorused in a single voice. One of them even verified and yes, that word, the first word on a page near the middle of the book, which was then put back to his original use. Naruto now even remembered coming up with the idea and looking in the book, even though it was the clone that had done such things. Damn, that was one powerful technique. The Naruto copy who'd decided to take a bath chose that particular time to come out, and noted, shouldn't you be going to the academy around this time, with his hair dripping all over the dirty clothing that made most of Naruto's carpet. Half of the Narutos in the room shot up at that statement, though only the real Naruto didn't go back to what he was doing. He dashed around, gathering the ninja equipment he'd carelessly dropped all over the place, and shot through the window, his usual shortcut for when he was late somewhere. Mizuki said he'd pass with one technique, so he couldn't wait to show it at the academy. He couldn't wait to get his hands on his own Hitai 8. Man, today was gonna be the best. Drop of Poison. Chapter 1. Beginnings of a Prank. Disclaimer. Naruto belongs to Kishimoto. Ramen belongs to Naruto. Enough said. Bonus points to anyone who recognizes the nod I'm giving to another great ninja story. Absolutely not. Why would stealing something forbidden even give you any opportunity to become a ninja? Personally, it'd be thankful the Hokage didn't arrest you like he should have. But Mizuki, and I don't see why the words of a traitor would have any impact on my decision. Actually, the fact that it came from him just proves that it shouldn't be used to help you pass. Kazuhi was one of the academy instructors Naruto liked the least. He'd been teaching since the boy entered the academy years ago, and kept punishing him whenever anything went wrong in a class, whether or not it had anything to do with him. Luckily, the man only taught shinobi history, and not important things like ninjutsu or taijutsu. Nevertheless, he'd always been a thorn in Naruto's side. The time he'd made the teacher fall through his chair was a good memory, though. Even counting the fact that this jutsu of yours would pass you the ninjutsu portion of the exam, you barely passed your accuracy, failed your taijutsu, and that's not talking about your abysmal score in both the history and math examinations. Even that wouldn't bring your score to the lowest passing grade. But, no, and that's final. Whatever that traitor said is of no import. Uzumaki-san, I will see in 2 weeks at the beginning of the next term. Good day. The man gave him a smile Naruto could only define as pleased, and shut the door to the teacher's lounge in front of his face. Dejected, Naruto shambled back to his apartment with slow steps. The downtime between academy years had always been the worst time for him, as he didn't even have school to do. He had no pranks planned either, so no clue how he'd survive the incoming boredom of the following weeks. Re-entering his home, Naruto found that his clones were still present and, in some cases, still eating ramen. They didn't seem affected by the fact he'd have to retake the whole academy year for the 4th time. Then again, he realized, they probably didn't even know about it yet. Naruto woke the few clones that were sleeping and, with all of them around him listening, he explained his situation. The reactions he got were varied. A few wanted to prank that Kazuhi hard, and some even had good suggestions about how to go about it, though Naruto didn't think he'd be able to get his hands on that many eggs. One argued about going to the Hokage with what Mizuki told him, but Naruto had to admit that would probably go as well as the first time he did so, and he'd be back in the academy nonetheless. All that stopped when a girl stepped through the windows. She was blonde, thin and a little taller than Naruto. She was holding down 2 shopping bags full of ramen in one hand, and using the other to pull herself inside. Hey guys, you can believe what I just found out, was the first thing she said upon coming in. Who the hell are you? Was the general answer by the mass of copies, including the original Naruto. She looked down at herself and, realizing something, did a single hand seal, releasing her henge and turning into another clone of Naruto. So clones can use techniques. That meant, Naruto just had a horribly interesting way to duplicate the power of his own created technique, one which would be sure to knock even the Sandaime in the hospital. Looking around, Naruto realized that by the faces his clones were making, the same idea had occurred to them. They all turned towards him. Harem no jutsu, they all said in the exact same moment. He nodded along with the clones. They now had another new technique, one even more powerful than his other original one. Before he could start laughing at the face Iruka or the Hokage would do, the clone who had just returned interrupted them again. No, something else. You know how shopkeepers would kick us out all the time, sell us only old stuff, or overcharge us horribly. All the other Narutos nodded. They now knew why, but they had dealt with that for a long time. Well, using henge, we can bypass that. I just came from the store in front of the flower shop, you know, the one with the spitting old man. They all nodded once more. Once that geezer had known that Naruto liked ramen, he'd taken it off the floor, removing the possibility of Naruto having any. He couldn't stop trying to spit on him, either. Well, I went there like this. He turned back into his former female form with a single seal. And the man couldn't help but being friendly. He even gave me a discount. Naruto and about half of the clones hit themselves in the head at the thought. They'd known that technique for years, and never tried applying it in that particular set of circumstances. Thinking how much more ramen he could have had if he'd. Another of the clones, though, shot up from his chair. We can use that. All the clones looked at him bizarrely. No, I mean, at the academy. You know how some teachers use any excuse to kick us out of the class, or tie us in a corner. All nodded. Well, we could get one or two clones in the academy, under Henge, pretending to be other students. So whenever Naruto gets kicked out, the others will still be there, and we might finally be able to ace those tests and graduate. Naruto agreed that it might work. Even better yet, it was like a prank. He'd be pulling a fast one in front of everyone, especially those stuffy academy teachers. Even better about that, if any of the clones pass the test while the original doesn't, we can just go to the Hokage with the fact that the clones under Henge are the same person as Naruto, and use that as an argument that we should pass. I'm sure the Hokage won't say no as long as we can prove that we did pass those exams. Naruto looked around to see that all the clones were discussing either the possibilities of this prank, or how to make it work. Thinking about it, there wasn't any reason not to try it. So, everyone's in agreement it seems. All nodded. So now let's get to the planning of that prank. First point to decide on is number, the clone under Henge started. How many clones are we gonna insert in the academy? 2. 2. 2's best. The rest nodded along. The transformed copy continued. Personally, I'd suggest making the two as different as possible to avoid both getting caught at the same time. True. Only problem is, the original Naruto interjected, keeping them from bursting. Any good hit could blow the whole thing up, and let's not talk about running out of chakra. I know I made you all yesterday, and you've lasted till now, but in a school where we'll be supposed to try techniques dozens of times, I can't say if you'll just disappear when using one. I might have an idea about that, replied 3 different clones simultaneously. They dug in the pile of scrolls behind them, and came out with a specific one. Chakra draining technique. Why would that be banned? The clone holding the scroll opened it, and read a single passage. For those not of the Akado bloodline, overusing this technique has been known to cause damage to the chakra coils, weakening them over time to the point of useless. Even sporadic usage of this technique will cause irreparable damage over a few months of time. So why should we be using it? Naruto asked. You shouldn't. The clone replied to the original. But we clones should. With that, as long as we have a source of chakra, we would technically last forever. At worst we'd be able to drain some chakra from you to last longer. Naruto nodded. He'd known for quite a while that he'd never have any problem with chakra in terms of amount, especially after the massive clone spree of yesterday, which didn't even leave him tired. The scroll he'd written about that particular technique said that even a single clone took enormous amount of chakra, so 100 times that meant he'd probably never have any problem concerning too little chakra. The scroll quickly got passed around, and Naruto realized that even training in that technique might be dangerous for him. He thought about grabbing another one for an instant, but noticed that there were already enough Naruto's training in his admittedly small apartment. Who said he couldn't find out? If he was planning to infiltrate an academy full of apprentice shinobi with Chunin teachers, surely he could manage to do the same in a school where there were no ninjas around. It was just an extra 2 clones, nothing that could tire him over much, and there were plenty of things he could learn that civilians did. There were blacksmiths and tailors and cooks. The many possibilities were colliding in his head when it was assaulted by a dozen memories. He suddenly remembered going shopping during the night, and finding out the effect of a simple henge on the populace, and training to draw chakra into oneself, and Naruto shook his head, returning to the present. Seemed like the first of his clones and finally burst. Somewhere around 18 to 20 hours, not bad for a first try. Especially since that was the clone that used techniques during the past day. Turning back towards his apartment, he was quickly assaulted by more thoughts from his bursting clones. By the time he had entered his kitchen, he could now remember being on all sides of the discussion earlier and writing down hundreds of techniques during the night. He barely remembered the individual techniques, as those memories merged into one another seamlessly, but bits and pieces were coming back to him one by one. His apartment was now empty of clones, so he created another dozen to continue training. He himself, however, turned towards his bed. He hadn't slept at all during the past night and, while he wasn't especially tired, he was expecting another late night training in the following evening. It was a clone bursting that brought him back to wakefulness. The memories it previously had interfered and merged with the dream he was having, and that alone brought his consciousness back up. As he stretched, another one of his clones vanished, and Naruto could guess the rest wouldn't last much longer. A look at his alarm clock proved what his clone's memories told him: he had barely slept 5 hours. Nevertheless, he felt quite rested and ready to tackle this night's training. By the time he'd finished his triple order of ramen, he was the only Naruto left in existence in his apartment. The latest memories confirmed that his clones hadn't managed to get the technique right just yet. Some had thought they had the right way, and others believed they'd managed to succeed for a second, but none could say that they'd really managed to do it right. Jumping out of his window, Naruto angled his descent to bounce from rooftop to rooftop, trusting his feet to lead him instinctively where he planned on training. His thoughts, however, were on other things. What he really wondered was how many clones he could manage in a single try. He'd known that he could create more than 100, his battle against Mizuki being proof of that, but that was after a hard day's training without stopping to eat or rest. The only other times he'd used the technique, he'd limited himself to a few clones as the situation restricted him. Now, though, he was well rested and as fully fed as he could get. Since he would be in the same training spot he'd used to master the Kage Bunshin, he could fill the area to his heart's content and not bother anyone. Barely a dozen minutes later, he was back where he'd first opened the scroll yesterday. The actual spot was easy to find, especially with the burnt circle of grass he'd left behind. The result of one of his most spectacular failures, he'd somehow put himself on fire trying to channel chakra. He'd now forgotten how he'd actually managed to accomplish such an event. Well, it's not like he'd be training about being on fire anyway. Standing in the middle of that circle, he focused his energies the needed way for the Kage Bushins to appear. He drew upon his chakra on, until he was scrapping the very bottom of reserves. At the exact instant he'd reached the end of his forces, his hands moved together in a flash, creating the needed seal to call out the technique. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. For a second, it was like someone had whacked the camera of reality, as the world shimmered before his eyes. Then it turned orange. Naruto couldn't say how many Kage Bunshins he'd created. Turning around, going up to the farthest he could see and probably even beyond that, there was a copy of his traditional suit moving around. Clones were hanging from trees like giant's leaves, and one even emerged from a pit in the ground. He was tired, true, but that was way beyond what he'd achieved against Mizuki. Naruto hadn't actually seen that much people in one place. Ever. Sitting down to recover his breath, he yelled at the awaiting army. Well, you people know what to do. There's ramen at Ichiraku for the first one who gets it right. Naruto nodded as he took a closer look at this so-called collection. It was simply various headbands pinned using shuriken to the back of a large wooden board that Naruto formerly used as target practice. He had to agree that they almost had them all. Leaf, cloud, sand, rock, mist, all the main ones were there, including most of them in missing nin version. Only missing sand was left to get among those. There was also a good amount of the ones from lesser villages. From those Naruto recognized grass and waterfall, though they were the only ones he could name. There was one with a crescent moon Naruto was sure to have seen before, but couldn't for the life of him remember where. As two clones entered from the window, Naruto decided he had enough equipment for now. "K people, listen up." All of the copies stopped what they were doing and turned towards him. "I think we have enough stuff for now. Those working on the map and those cleaning up the pile can finish up what they're doing, but everyone coming back with stuff doesn't go back for more. What are we gonna be doing?" noted one of the recently returned clones. "We're gonna be going through this," the original countered, pointing at the pile of scrolls they copied from the Forbidden One. "We're gonna need to classify those. 4 classifications. Learnable, those needing we know specific techniques beforehand, those we won't be ever be able to do, like those that need specific bloodline or such stuff, and those we've got no use learning, like suicidal techniques or stuff that would kill us. He took a deep breath. Let's get to it, people. Yeah, Yumino Iruka was glad to finally be out of the hospital. A general antitoxin had easily flushed out the poison from his system, but the medic had kept him for an extra day just to make sure he'd purged out everything that QB Brat did, as they said it. The Chunin knew that Naruto had nothing to do with him being poisoned or any of his other wounds, so guessed that Naruto must have been the one to carry his unconscious body to the hospital. Unsurprising, since the other possible survivor of that battle, Mizuki, would probably have given him a quick death instead of a trip to a healer. Concerning the specifics of that battle, his own memory was pretty fuzzy. He remembered Naruto coming out of hiding to protect him, a few words here and there of banter between the two ninja, and nothing conclusive after that. He thought he'd seen Naruto use a cloning technique to fill the forest with clones, but wasn't really sure if that was a hallucination or a genuine memory. It wasn't that he doubted the talent of one of his favorite students, no, it was simply that someone like Naruto, whose lack of skill with the Bunshins was legendary, could manage such a feat. He'd have to see it with his own eyes. And that was what he was doing, visiting Naruto. He'd already gone to Ichiraku and ordered a dozen or so bowls to go. He'd owed Naruto that much for the save, and he'd wanted to talk to the boy. As a teacher, Iruka had access to the addresses of any of his students. He'd never been to Naruto's place, though one look at the building in his neighborhood and the teacher understood why Naruto had never invited him there. Frankly, the place was a dump. However, it was visible Naruto was home, judging by the sounds coming from his open window. Iruka made his way to the top floor, noting the many voices coming from his student's apartment. Judging that Naruto probably had someone over, he politely knocked on the door. Hello Naruto, it's Iruka. Can I come in? Soon as possible. With the Naruto's innate mastery of the transformation technique, it took barely 2 minutes before the first clone dispersed himself by jamming his head on the corner of Naruto's kitchen table. Naruto tested the forms right after that. Good. Everything was perfect. Memories surged again barely an instant later, so Naruto expected another of his clones outside had a message to send. He remembered a whole lot of going around the forest, grabbing stuff, and had memories of doing the same in Konoha. He remembered finding an abandoned mansion, with seals protecting the windows. He'd remembered using the chakra draining technique to bypass them, and going inside to find dozens of abandoned rooms. Good. He'd found a new use to that technique. He'd even found a giant underground training room. But the main memory was the following words, the last thing he'd heard before bursting. All Narutos should come and see this as soon as possible. We possibly have an even better training ground found now. Coming back to the present, the real Naruto found all his clones looking at him with eager eyes. They were very obviously waiting for his approval. He pointed towards one of the clones that had taken liberties with the ramen Iruka left. You stay here in case Iruka comes back. The rest of you, let's go. Yosh. Naruto's apartment then proceeded to empty itself through its single window. Coming up in front of Hokage Tower, Iruka made to the guards the hand sign meaning he required a meeting with the Hokage. His presence wasn't anything special. As the top teacher at the academy, he met with the Sandaime sometimes more than twice a day. Most of those meetings were actually about Naruto, though the Chunin had actually lodged complaints about other students some of those times. The various guards let him pass as they always did, though the Anbu guarding his door stopped him. It seemed that the Hokage was busy, and that Iruka would have to wait. And wait he did, his mind going over the words and phrases he would use. He was pretty sure the Hokage would agree with his proposition, but the trick was how not to reveal too much and break the promise he made. He would if he had to. The opportunity to get Naruto a normal education was worth more, but Iruka was a man of his word and he'd do everything in his power not to come to that. Anyway, He was pretty sure that the Sandaime would keep Naruto's secret if it came that he had to reveal it. The man had always tried everything to get Naruto accepted in Konoha, so he'd continue on with this secret. A tap on his shoulder interrupted his musing. One of the ninja guarding the door was there, trying to get his attention. He'd been thinking so hard he'd even forgotten to pay attention to his environment. The Hokage will see you now, the man said. Author's notes. About Naruto's transformation technique being different. It's evident from the Naruto bridge arc that Naruto's transformation is different. It's either that or Sasuke having an innate mastery of throwing Naruto like a shuriken in the shadow of another one. I chose to go with the most logical choice. About the information about seals. I took all the information for seals on Narutopedia, which I use as a reference for this story. The transformation technique requires reverse RAM, and not RAM. However, Naruto's Warok no Jutsu, which is supposedly a transformation, needs only RAM. I agree, but we'll need to give them names first. Have you thought about that? He hadn't. He racked his brain for a few seconds, but came up with nothing that wasn't evident, like Naruto, or the name of a former classmate. In desperation, he turned towards the clones carrying the former contents of his place. Anyone have any idea of a name for our female ninja clone? The horde stopped what they were doing and plunged into thought themselves. Not really. Arika, said one in the back. Arika. He thought about it for a few minutes. He liked the connotations. Good. One down. How about the male one? Murmuru, said the clone who was in the specific form of that persona. It was blatant he'd been thinking about it. Murmuru it is. And the others? Naruto said, smiling. Uruka, however, couldn't help but snicker inside. It was a prank all right, and the names fit perfectly. Luckily people probably wouldn't notice the link, especially if Naruto kept from using his cloning technique too much. Now all the clones got in the game and gave their favorites, each talking over the other and trying to make himself listen to. Uruka, well used to a rowdy class, took a sheet of paper, a pen and started noting those worth something. Slowly the clones even started inventing family names, something which suited the Chunin just fine. Eventually Naruto got tired of trying to make sense of all those copies speaking over each other and shut up everyone with an order. Here, Uruka handed the sheet he'd been taking notes on to the boy. That's a list of the ones I found the most promising. Sit down tonight and choose those you like. I'll see you tomorrow around noon. Okay. Where do we meet tomorrow? Where's best? You know Training Ground 23. Interjected a clone. You all know very well I do. It's the closest one to the academy. Meet us there then. One question though, where do you live? Why? To use the best exit of course, the clone replied. Giving general directions and receiving some in exchange, Uruka found himself coming out 30 minutes later out of a moss-covered fountain in a copse of trees a block or two from his home. He'd been there many times in his youth, even cried over his parents at this very same spot, and he'd never thought of finding a secret path there. He wondered where else those paths lead, and shuddered to think what could happen if one led anywhere near the Hokage monument. As Naruto looked at the back of his teacher's shirt for the second time this day, he made a few calculations in his head. Going by past experience, he realized that he only had 15 days before classes restarted. Combine that with putting a day or so between each group arriving, and the need for them to be present in Konoha at least a few days before the start of classes, it made for pretty rushed preparation. Giving the sheet with the names to one of his transformed clones, the original Naruto instead went around and gathered a few specific clones. The one who came up with Arika was the first, along with the one who found the Urahara place and two of the clones who'd been sorting scrolls in his apartment. Added to that were two copies that had been exploring the town and the Bunshin that had first succeeded at the draining technique. He led all those in an upstairs room that had probably once been used for conferences, and sat his council right there. So, the original said, once all were seated. I've just realized that we had less than 2 weeks to prepare for everything that's needed before the academy. Looking around, Naruto could see each and every copy obviously counting down in their heads. He knew that they hadn't realized yet the implications that the time left meant, and that was exactly why he'd asked them here for advice. The boy had realized somewhere in the past day that even though they were his clones and that they were speaking with his voice, that didn't mean that they were thinking the very same things. He knew that they all had the same general opinions, as the whole the clones had eaten in his flagging ramen reserves kept reminding him, but their different emphasis on specific experiences meant their thoughts were not always running down the same paths. As Naruto saw the conclusion of the countdown in each pair of eyes, he continued. That's why we need to plan down everything that's needed before the academy starts. We can't ask Iruka to think of everything like he did today. The whole table nodded. So, anything coming to mind? Well, sending out the clones that are going to come from outside as soon as possible is a given. Not right now, though, another Bushin interjected. We need first to give them the money Iruka's gonna give us tomorrow. After that, we send them all and message them by clone once they should be coming in. True. How about jobs? All Narutos in the room turned towards the clone who'd given that statement. I mean, the two civilians will need a mother, a father or both. Nods all around. So these two clones will either have to pretend to be rich, or have jobs. And frankly, I don't think Iruka will give us access to an enormous amount of money. So what jobs should they be? The original Naruto admitted that was a valid point. Even if the civilians had a lesser chance of being found out, someone would be asking questions about their parents once for sure. That means they needed a way to be making money. The only problem with that was how. Naruto didn't know much about how civilians lived, and the few occupations he knew outside ninjas were cooks like Tsuki and Ayame, merchants or apartment managers. Unfortunately, Naruto had nothing he could think of selling, no skills outside the ninja arts, and didn't think he'd receive enough from Iruka to buy a whole apartment building. Talking went around, but all suggestions needed either more money than they'd likely receive, or knowledge they wouldn't be able to get in the short time needed. Eventually, the only thing possible on that front became asking Iruka for ideas, and that point was tabled. Then came the discussion on what techniques to learn, and in what order, during which the room fell in total pandemonium. Generating clones to go and get scrolls didn't help either. Drop of Poison. Chapter 4. The Start of a Plan. Disclaimer. Naruto belongs to Kishimoto. Ramen belongs to Naruto. Enough said. Iruka was, as an academy teacher, used to rising early. He'd also had many a late-night grading exams and planning them. However, getting up the morning he was supposed to go to Shinobi Archival was the most difficult beginning of a day he'd had in a long while. Probably since he last did the Chunin exam. You did a good job convincing me that rabbits made good ninjas, so I don't see why not. The rabbit puffed in obvious pride. You just have to sign a specific scroll that we rabbits have in our lands. Can you bring it with you? Nope. He handed the rabbit the second white scroll. Can this scroll bring someone who can? The rabbit looked at the scroll for a few seconds, and then shook his head negatively. Nope. This one summons me too. He pointed a specific set of characters on the scroll. See here. That's me, Aikibo. Then, Aikibo, how am I supposed to sign it? Only one way. Go to grass. There's a place in grass where we can appear without being summoned. Go in the forest north of Hakudo-cho and summon me there. I'll lead you to it. Okay. Good. Naruto Uzumaki. I'll see you there. The rabbit vanished in a puff of smoke. Naruto wasted no time in summoning a dozen clones. He knew he'd need to summon a lot more soon, to replace those who had fallen to the crab, but those would wait until he'd started training in the cage bunshin a little more. Looking at the new dozen, he ordered. You know what to do. Get to grass as soon as possible. Message me once you get there, and once more with the results of the meeting there. Oh, and try not to draw too much suspicion while getting there, okay? Okay. One thing, a clone training not too far interjected. How are they going to summon that rabbit once there? Using the scroll, of course. And how does that work? Well, you make a line in. Naruto stopped, thinking for a few moments. I see what you mean. Naruto finally admitted. I think I have a solution, another clone admitted. Naruto turned towards him and realized most of the bunchins in a radius around him had given up training, and were watching the unfolding conversation. Said clone dashed out of the basement of their new place, and came back a few minutes later with a specific sealing scroll. He unsealed its contents at Naruto's feet. Dozens of vials, pills and bandages unfolded, including more than a few empty vials. The false Naruto took some in his hands. Just fill these with blood, and then reseal them. The clones'll simply need to use those to activate the scroll. Naruto nodded, then took a kunai and opened a blood vessel. It took more than a few tries to succeed in filling all the vials, as the wounds kept closing before finishing up. Naruto then handed back the full vials to the clone who'd handed them. Here, you go with them, since you seem to know what to do. Sure. The bunchin sealed the items back, then rose and gathered the dozen copies Naruto had summoned. The grass group was out the next minute and Naruto was back to his training. He wanted to have a little improvement in the clones' toughness before summoning another large batch. The classes didn't. Lack of practical application. The sabotaging of the teachers. He knew he'd worked at least at 5 different occasions with Naruto on his basic bunchin, but the boy hadn't improved. He was pretty sure he had the right information for that one, with the many times he'd forced the boy to repeat it to him. Done. Iruka came out of his thoughts to see that Naruto had finished filling the sheet with the information he asked, with hundreds of first names written down in 3 columns. No last names. They didn't use them over there. The way he said, there, explained clearly what he thought of the place. The Chunin was suddenly ashamed of having had to bring back these memories to his favorite student. You have an exceptional memory for people, the teacher said, as an explanation. The boy blushed at the praise. Smiling at the reaction, the Chunin rose. Keep up working at your prank like that, and I'm pretty sure I'll be seeing you graduate this year. Now, can you lead me back home? Naruto rose. Sure. The 2 friends left the room while Iruka was mussing his favorite's hair. Naruto's message to spread as a combined information trading network had reached the dozen of bunchins with the remaining summoning scroll right as they were leaving Hakuto-cho. The group had made very good time mainly because of a fortunate discovery. They had an easier time with Kawarimi if they warped long distances. They'd tested while moving out of Konoha. A simple Kawarimi meant to move you 5 meters ahead failed 90% of the time, while one going for a distance of 20 or so meters actually succeeded half the time. At 100, they'd only failed once out of 50 or so tries, and farther from that was even better. They could easily manage 500 meters or more, with the record being a jump of somewhere around 4 kilometers. This led to a very bizarre game of tag between clones that went from the Leaf Village to the border of Fire Country, all in a single night. The group had rested and refilled its reserves once in Grass Country, and had managed to find the required village well before sundown. Upon receiving Naruto's orders, each of the copies had made another, and all the newly created ones spread out to gather information around in nearby cities. The others made a final few Kawarimis and reached the first trees of the forest. We wanna be like that. We wanna protect my precious people and have them see me as an equal, not as something that should be eliminated or tortured. And Konoha is a precious thing to me. Does that make sense? It does to me, the black rabbit answered. He, though the blonde, was like most people, thinking ninjas were cool because they were strong. That or his family pushing him in that direction. Aikibo was glad to see that the boy was there of his own decision, having a good idea what the job entailed. Here, Aikibo handed the lead Naruto the scroll. You deserve it. Thanks. This will allow me to summon all of you. No. This will summon my boss, the leader of all rabbits. He wants you to summon him in your burrow, and to meet you in person. My burrow. Your home. The place you summoned me first. Have the real one summon him like you did for me. K. Thanks a lot. The lead clone put the scroll down in one of his pockets, then turned towards the rest of the group. Okay people, let's see if we can beat our previous speed and be back in Konoha before tomorrow night. Yosh. A second later, all the Narutos were gone. Aikibo, however, turned to face the tree in the center of the clearing. So, what do you think? Dispelling the genjutsu that had hidden him, the lead figure answered. He is different, I will give you that. He is untrained in the dance of battle, but has great spirit, another added. The third figure said nothing. He smells of fox, though, the leading one said. He already has a contract. Not that I know of, Aikibo answered. He didn't seem to know much about summoning at all. The rabbit waited a moment. So, your feelings? We will see, the leading figure smiled. After coming back from escorting his teaching friend home and messaging his far-off clones, Naruto paused to look at the mass of clones training in his underground base. All of them were now training on the chakra shield technique, hoping to have it down before the week ended and classes restarted. None of the Narutos had even gotten close yet. Jumping between two rock pillars, the original shinobi came to rest atop one. He'd been using this particular spot as a training area for the last few days, right after he'd used it as a lookout while battling the summoned crab. The best thing about it was that he could easily see all around without much trouble, and the fact that his clones could find him without much effort. After a quick look around to see if anyone needed his help, Naruto sat down and focused on the specifics of this technique, as they had been written on the scroll. There weren't many. The technique was, in essence, very easy. It had no seals or other movement, only raw application of chakra. It was all about compressing said energy and using it as an extra layer of skin. Looking back to the sea of orange training below, Naruto quickly realized they were all going at it in similar ways, each releasing chakra in bursts and trying to make it solid, if only for a second. It didn't seem to be making much progress, either. He'd try something different, then. Naruto released his chakra in one continuous surge, a blue aura of power forming around his entire body. Now, compressing it, he said to himself, trying to force his own energies to his will. So, you expect to be in Konoha in 2 days? Yup, the caravan master said. Just make sure to be here at 8 tomorrow morning. If yours ain't there, we be leaving without you. No worries, sir, the lead clone answered after a look at his family. We will be there. Perfect. The group of Naruto left the caravan depot toward the motel they had rented earlier. The decision to use such means to enter the Leaf Village had come upon seeing one such caravan on the way to the city they were currently in, and had decided as a group that this way would be much more normal for a civilian family. They'd rented a place in the biggest caravan they'd found in the city that was continuing to Konoha, claiming that the previous caravan they had taken had gone no farther than this point. Now back in the privacy of their shared room, the group released their transformations, saving up chakra that way. So, how many clones should we make? The Naruto impersonating the father asked. Well, the clone added. You did notice we received a message to spread clones outside Konoha. The 3 others nodded. Why should we create more than one each? I'll answer you with a question. Did you notice how many caravans were in town? And how many destinations they covered? I have a good idea about the number, but not so much about the destinations. The 2 other clones shook their heads negatively. I have to agree most caravans' final destination is wind, but they have different way of getting there. Grass, river, bird, rain, those are all on the path to wind. We already have a team in grass, added one of the children clones. But none in the others. And that list doesn't include all those not passing by wind. I saw caravans going to waterfall, vegetable and rice field along with one going by sea to tea country. If we send clones in all of those, we have a good third of all the great countries covered. Point, said the second of the child clones. I think I can manage a good 5, how about you? That night, 30 more copies stealthily left the motel that the false family was using, and by the next day they were on their way outside of Fire Country. Shiro Nokaru was a proud chunin of the Leaf who, as was usual for him, was assigned the surveillance of a part of the tall stockade surrounding Konoha. It was a job he'd done more than any other in his life, and that he was satisfied as such. Having been to such a post for a long while, he'd thought he'd seen everything outside of full-out war. That was why, 2 hours into his guard shift, he was graced by the sight of something he'd never expected to be possible. There was a boy climbing the wall. And by climbing he didn't mean wall walking. He'd already seen some of those, new genins having just been taught the method, trying to prove themselves great by climbing the tallest building they could see. Those climbing the wall usually got off lucky, at least compared to those trying the same on the Hokage monument. The Anbu were much less forgiving on average. No, this kid was doing it the old-fashioned method, with a knife in each hand and some kind of spike on his shoes. Shiro had to admire the guts the kid had. The wall itself was taller than most buildings in the city, and was hard rock. If he missed, the fall would surely kill him. The Chunin decided to wait until he'd finished his ascent, or to catch him if he fell. It took an hour for the boy to finish his climb. The wall guard had to give it to the boy. He had stamina, especially considering he didn't look a day over 12. Dispelling the genjutsu he'd used to hide himself, the Chunin asked, "Is there any reason why you did that?" Surprised, the boy turned while jumping to the side. Good reflexes, Shiro noted, though his balance could use some work. "How did you get here?" The kid said, his weapons, 2 knives so dulled by the climb he would have hurt a fly with them, in a decent offensive position. A ninja never tells his secrets. "You're a ninja." The boy's face changed instantly, a big smile shining on it. "This is Konoha, right?" Shiro nodded. "I wanna join." The face became pleading. "You want to be a ninja?" "Yeah, and what do your parents have to say about that?" The face the boy made answered all of the Chunin's questions. Rage, sadness, pain, loneliness, all mixed together. Either the boy's parents died recently, or he'd been abandoned not so long ago. "Tell you what." He changed the subject. "I still have 2 hours before my break, so I'm going to test you until then. If you do good enough, I'll bring you to the academy for enrolling, okay?" The boy's face teared up again, but this time in happiness. "Thank you," he cried out, bowing as he did. "What's your name?" "Murmuru." "Don't thank me yet, Murmuru," Shiro smiled. He then put him to the test. The whole works. Push-ups, sit-ups, throwing, dodging, even a mock battle. The kid impressed him again, nonetheless. He lasted the whole 2 hours without complaining or rest. Sure, he wasn't perfect, his throwing was horrible and his taijutsu needed a lot of work, but the boy was fast, dodged well, and his stamina was high even for being a kid full of energy. Come his break, he had no choice but to uphold his end of the bargain. Bringing him to the academy, he noticed another thing he liked in the boy: he was focused. He passed the whole way to the ninja school in silence. Sure, he was looking around on both sides, but he went the distance in silence, even though Shiro was sure he had 100 questions. Once in the building, he made his way to Aruka's door, and a single knock had the teacher opening the way to his office. "Nokaru-san, what can I do to help you?" "Yumino-san, I have a child for you." Yumino Aruka was of the same genin class as he was, though contact between them had been rare after that time. They had gone in too much different ways, in the end. Shiro brought the boy forward. "He is someone without parents, and has made his way here to be able to enroll as a ninja. I will take care of him, Yumino-san," someone said behind them. Turning around, both Shiro and Aruka noticed another Chunin had joined them. The wall guard knew him well, having been in a team under his leadership at many a time during his genin days. "I have no problem in doing his inscription, Hyojin-san," Aruka replied. "You have already missed 2 days and are probably still late on your work," Hyojin Kiratori stated in his habitual neutral tone. While many found this peculiarity of his speech condescending, Shiro knew that this way just his way. He still sounded like an Aburame, though. Since my own preparatory work is complete, it is better for all that I take care of it. If you say so. Uruka relented. Good day then, Nokaru-san, Hyojin-san. He then retreated into his office. Both he and Murmuru followed the older instructor to the door of his own office, where said person turned to the boy. Can you wait for me in my office while I talk to Nokaru-san here? I won't be long. Sure. The boy said, leaving the two to their conversation. I didn't know you had asked for a job as an instructor, Shiro noted as soon as the boy was gone. Sandame-sama personally came to see me as soon as the debacle with Mizuki was over, he said, rare emotion entering his word as he spoke the traitor's name. It fit well with my plans, also. Your plans? I am getting old, Shiro. He said, sighing. And it was true. For a ninja, he was in his late 50s, past retirement age. And with what happened with the Kyuubi, I'm the last of my clan. But I swore to my father when he taught me our clan's style that I would do everything I could for it not to die. So I have been looking for the past 3 years for someone that could carry my legacy. A child I could train to be the next master of the sharp fist. And, nothing. I've looked at the last 3 graduating classes and all those with talent for taijutsu end up being clan members already using a specific style. And I won't let my clan's style be assimilated by another. What about this Rock Lee kid? Guys screaming to all corners that he's the next taijutsu master of Konoha. True, he has the potential, but my style needs chakra usage to be fully mastered. He unfortunately couldn't make the cut. He sighed again. He obviously cared about his style very much. It was the most emotion he'd seen in the man ever. Now, to come back to what I wanted to ask. Kiratori added, how did you come by the boy? You won't believe me. Do tell. He climbed the wall. He already knows how to use chakra. No, not that I know of. He climbed the old-fashioned way. Both were silent for a moment. That is impressive. He might be what you're looking for. He's got at least speed and endurance, and while his combat skills are nothing to write home about, it would at least allow you to start from scratch. I will see. What about his family? Either dead or having abandoned him. His face told me as much. Do you want me to put you as the boy's sponsor? Shiro thought for an instant. Why not? He deserves it for what I put him through. You need anything else from me? No. Then, I'll be leaving him in your capable hands while I return to the wall. Good day. Good day. The instructor said as the other ninja disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Entering his office, he found the boy seated on the chair reserved to guest. Said child quickly turned around to look at him. I do not know if Shiro introduced me to you, so I will do so. My name is Hyojin Kiratori, and I will be the taijutsu instructor starting next session. The boy raised his hand. Yes, taijutsu. Combat with either the body or with weapons. Now, can I have your name? Murmuru. The Chunin wrote it down. Family name. The child's face tensed and lowered. I don't have any family. I am sorry if this causes you pain, but I need complete information to do your inscription. So your family name would be Joka. The boy's face didn't rise. Place of residence? None. The questions continued in the same vein for a good 30 minutes. It took a good 10 of those for the boy's eyes to get back up, but by the end he was smiling as if nothing had happened. Kiratori had learned a magic word to make the boy's spirit rise back up. Ninja. As Murmuru started in the physical evaluation that came with wanting to be a ninja, the Chunin couldn't help but notice exactly what his past subordinate had told him earlier. He had been right. This kid might have been the exact person he'd been waiting for. For Uruka, the day passed with agonizing slowness. He'd expected to be the one writing in both of Naruto's prank inscriptions into Konoha Academy, but couldn't find anything on the spot to oppose the words of the elder Chunin. And the worst was he was right. He was still late in his preparations. Worst was, Uruka had passed the whole afternoon juggling from supply notice to student annulations to weapon requisition form, all the while going at half his usual speed due to anxiety. And the knowledge of the problem did anything but help. Hyojin Kiratori, who'd been chosen by the Hokage to replace Mizuki, was something of a legend in the Chunin circles. A taijutsu specialist of high grade, while not on the level of Maida Guy, he was one of the few Chunin to be consistently given A-rank missions. The rumor was he turned down the Jonin rank at least twice, for reasons unknown though, again, widely gossiped about. He was probably one of the top Chunin in Konoha. He was more than good enough to be able to see through disguises. So Iruka stressed continuously, expecting every second to have Naruto surge in telling him his prank had been seen through, or his college notifying him of an infiltration attempt. He nearly hit the ceiling when someone knocked on his door in the late afternoon. Kiratori came in right after that, and handed him the registration papers. While placing the various sheets in their respective folders, Iruka couldn't help himself but ask questions. So, what should I expect of our newest student? Probably a taijutsu specialist, his college answered. Full of energy. Very focused. Iruka boggled internally at that. I have high hopes for the boy after he's unlocked usage of his chakra. However, his scores in the written evaluation are borderline, so you and Kazuhi might have issues with his work. All in all, a good match for most students. Okay, Iruka answered. His concentration wasn't fully there, but he was glad that Naruto's plan was still underway without any great issue. Do you need me for anything else? The elder Chunin asked. Iruka quickly checked through the various papers he had been handed, verifying if they were complete. No, it seems everything is filled completely. You can go. I'll also be leaving as soon as this has been properly placed. I will see you tomorrow then. When Iruka entered Naruto's underground training facility, he was graced with the sight of something akin an all-out war. Each and every clone in sight was fighting each other. They were visibly restraining themselves, battling only using their fists, feet and kunais. Iruka waited at the end of the tunnel he had taken, looking around, when he finally noticed what they were doing. They were training. They had some kind of technique Iruka didn't know, one that allowed them to block attacks with just about any part of their body. Just now the Chunin had seen a Naruto bat away a kunai with his head, all without bursting. It was pretty impressive. A single more minute allowed Iruka to find what he expected was the original Naruto. He was standing on one of the many rocky protuberances the place had, and was the only one not actively fighting. He also frequently summoned more cage bunchins, which is how the academy teacher had spotted him. Making his way there, Iruka marveled at the training. With the sheer amount of clones working, he'd gain mastery at a rate that was unbelievable. Jumping. When he landed right beside his most unpredictable pupil, he couldn't help but smile at the sight of him. Good evening, Naruto. Evening, Iruka. He did a quick look around. How did you manage to find the real me? Easy. First, you're not fighting. Second, I'm pretty sure your clones can't use Cage Bunshin as much as I've seen you use it. He scratched behind his head. Well, you caught me, he said, smiling. I'd like to talk to you, so, could we move someplace a little quieter, please? Sure. 1 second. Once more doing the specific hand sign necessary for his jutsu, the academy student called into being the largest wave of copies up to date. He then turned to the one closest to him. Pass the message. I want you clones to continue fighting until there's only a single one left, okay? Okay, the clone answered. A second later he was beset by kunais coming from various points, including the original. He managed to block the first 5, but the 6th turned him back into smoke. Let's go, Naruto then exclaimed. He led Iruka back into the room the Chunin had seen the last time he was here, however this time the council was absent and only the 2 of them were present. The Chunin did not wait a second and took a chair opposite his favorite student. So, is everything going fine? Naruto said as soon as his teacher was no longer standing. Yes, but I have a question first. What exactly was going on down there? Training. I'd noticed. What kind? A banned technique from the Scroll of Seals. It simply allows one to create a hard skin made of chakra to block. Why train in that one? You do know my clones will have to participate in whatever taijutsu training there will be during class, right? They'll need something like this simply to survive whenever we have free for all sparring. True. He hadn't thought about that possible solution. Iruka had been planning on keeping Naruto and/or one of his clones for the taijutsu exercises, under various pretenses. Only one would be going, and that would have been the true Naruto under Henge. He was glad that the boy had found another way, as his plan was pretty risky. You should be more careful about training in those, you know. They were banned for a reason. Yeah, I know, but I'm pretty sure this one was mostly banned due to politics. Why would that be? It interferes with the Hyuga Juken. Iruka whistled and nodded. He had to agree with the conclusion Naruto had come to. The Hyuga clan had much in the way of political power, and they were well known to oppose anything that limited the power of their style. Be careful anyway. No worries. My clones already went through every technique, removing those that were dangerous to me in any way, which didn't include anything related to chakra exhaustion, as Naruto was pretty sure it was impossible for him. He paused for an instant. Now, how went my latest clone's inscription? You probably know better than me. Iruka answered. Then how about we trade information? Asked Naruto. Perfect with me. Naruto then explained everything from climbing the wall to the moment when the academy teacher had left him, after applying and being given a budget as an orphaned academy student. Iruka added whatever comments Kiratori had given him. I have a question though. Iruka said at the end. Ask away. Kiratori-san said you were very focused. How? That's just the personality I decided for Murmuru. Is there any issue with that? Are you sure you won't have any problem keeping up that appearance during class? He waited an instant. Not to be insulting, but you aren't the most focused boy in the classroom. Are you sure you will be able to keep that appearance up? Sure, I can be focused when I want to. Remember that time with the tags? You know, the one 2 years ago. It took some time before Iruka remembered that specific moment, but he groaned once he did. After a week without pranks, Naruto had managed to put explosive tags in every single place Iruka could have thought of. Luckily those had been training tags issued for the academy, those being generally as strong as a simple firecracker. He'd even managed to chain them in specific ways, like those he'd used to make every single drawer in the room open abruptly before their contents exploded out. Iruka had to admit the level of focus necessary for such a prank was much more than he'd ever shown in class. Then, why didn't you show that focus in the academy? 'Cause it's boring. Those tests you give out, I've already done them. Most of those lectures I've already had. When I go to school, I wanna be taught something new and useful, not something boring and useless. For the prank it won't be a problem, since it's for a prank, but the rest of the time it's not worth the effort. It's not like you're teaching any new ninjutsu, after all. Before Iruka could answer anything, a clone entered the room at high speed. Boss, you gotta come down here. He said. Why? The clones you sent to grass are back. And why didn't you use a clone to message me? We did. 3 times even. You just didn't receive it, it seems. The Naruto copy answered. While Iruka followed Naruto back down, he was thinking about the speech Naruto had given him. He had to agree that any kid having to do the same thing twice wouldn't be interested the second time. And most exams were similar in most points. There had to be a way of making it more interesting. Once back into his training room before the delegation sent to grass, Naruto waited no time. Back already? Yup. The lead Bunshin answered. Didn't I tell you to message once you were there? You did and we did. It's the first time we heard that a message didn't come through. I think it's because we're starting to have too many clones. Probably something to do with multiple clones dispersing at the same time. Troublesome, the original said, copying Shikamaru. Anyway, how did you manage to get from here to grass and back in less than a week? We found something, boss. The Bunshin waited a moment. You know the problems we have with the replacement technique. The real Naruto, along with most of the clones standing around him, nodded. Well, it's all a matter of distance. The farther we move with the technique, the easier it is. Impossible. Uruka interrupted. The replacement technique may not have set limits, but anything beyond 100 meters can't be done. Want to bet? The clone answered. He pointed towards one of the many rocky spires rising from the ground. How far would you estimate that spike to be? The Chunin looked carefully. 300 to 400 meters, at least. Look hard. The clone did the required hand signs in a flash, and a large rock took its place. Turning around, Uruka saw that it had switched itself exactly the distance it had said, and was now standing and waving from the top of said rock. A second later, he was back, having replaced himself back with the same stone. Enough proof for you, he said, smirking. Uruka nodded, in shock. The replacement technique was E-rank, and the idea that someone could move so far on so little chakra was preposterous. You'd need to overload the jutsu incredibly too. The gears started turning into the Chunin's mind. Unless you overload the jutsu, such distances were impossible. In all the techniques Naruto knew, some were impossible to overload, like Kage Bunshin, while he had issues with every single technique from the academy, which took very little chakra. Except the transformation technique, but since his was different from any other it might be much more demanding in term of chakra. Hey Uruka, Naruto asked. The Chunin waved his student into silence. Gathering all his reserves, he tried doing exactly what he had asked for the last exam at the academy, 2 normal bunshins. Only this time, he wanted to overload them as much as possible. Going through the needed hand signs, he channeled as much chakra as he could in the technique, all the while limiting himself to 2 clones. Said clones appeared. They were, however, similar to the last 2 normal clones Naruto had summoned. Their skin was clammy and they were visibly sick, and vanished less than 2 seconds after appearing. I finally understand, Uruka finally said, breathing hard. Why the normal clones didn't work for you. All the Narutos turned towards him in unison. Why? It wasn't lack of effort, as I'd thought, but too much effort. You were putting too much chakra in the technique, and that's why it always failed. Oh, they all answered. That's good that we finally found out, the teacher added. Especially since your 2 clones in the academy have to be proficient in that technique, especially if you want them to stand out for you. Right. The true Naruto said, while all others fell silent. It took a few minutes before he turned back to the group coming for grass. So, since I didn't receive the message, how did it go with Aikibo? Here, the leader of the clone group said, tossing him the scroll. You need to summon this guy. Here, the leader of the clone group said, tossing him the scroll. You need to summon this guy. Catching the scroll, Naruto eyed it carefully. After the debacle with the crab, he was more careful with summoning than he'd been before. Who is it supposed to summon? The boss of the rabbits. Thinking a few moments, the original student answered. Why don't you go over what happened since you left? The clone group did so, each speaking in turn to complete what the previous had started, which made the conversation difficult to follow. Not helping was the fact that the various explanations sparked some memories inside Naruto. He evidently remembered some form of what happened, but not consciously. Fortunately, or unfortunately, this wasn't the time to dwell on such things. So, in short, the blonde ninja said, once the explanation was winding down. The guy this thing summons is the one who'll decide if we make the cut or not, true? The group of Bunshin nodded. What do you think, sensei? Uruka jolted out of his thoughts at that phrase. Sorry Naruto, I wasn't paying attention. You were saying, he asked. Said boy quickly gave a quick description of the various discussions within about the rabbit summons for his teacher. Uruka was originally appalled at the risks his student had taken, but couldn't argue with the results. So, what do you think? Naruto added, seeing that the Chunin was still pondering what he had said. After a few seconds of not finding any point to argue, the teacher nodded. I can't find any reason not to summon this rabbit leader of yours. I doubt it could be a trap, and even then the sheer number of clones would pretty much ensure an escape. Just don't be afraid to run if it gets dangerous. Also, prepare a large space. I've heard that some of the boss summons are quite large. The Bunchins started moving at said words. Okay. Can I stay here and watch? I've never seen any of the boss summons, so it would be a learning experience for me also. No problem, his student answered, unrolling the scroll on the ground before him. He then took one of his kunai, slashed open a finger and spread the blood in a line in a smooth motion. For all Aruka had said rabbit wasn't large at all. He was 1 or 2 inches taller than the Chunin, and was standing in a similar way as any human. He wasn't wearing much, but was covered with pale gray fur. His only accoutrements were a leather strap holding a bag full of staves in his back, and a pair of black gloves with steel plates made for his animal hands. As soon as his eyes opened, he fixed Naruto with a stare. Naruto stood there, impassive. After a full minute where Naruto stood still while Aruka stressed but refrained from moving, the summon lifted his stare. The pressure that had been there evaporated in an instant. The rabbit sniffed, then smiled. I can see you're something special, Kit. Naruto relaxed at those words, and smiled. It was the shy smile Aruka saw rarely, like the time he'd given the boy the money for his prank. He relaxed also. I am Nanabo-o, leader of the rabbit summons, and Aikibo has interceded in favor of you signing the rabbit contract. The non-human figure did any few seals, which seemed bizarre considering his hands, and 2 other rabbits appeared. One was a little shorter than Naruto, was wearing clothes similar to those of a samurai with 2 swords hanging from his side, and had his ears tied together. The other was a normal rabbit, the same size as Aikibo had been. It had 2 weapons consisting of 2 differently sized short blades on wooden handles hanging somehow on his back. Both were pure white. These 2 will be the ones testing you, the summon leader said before turning to his subordinates. Miyamoto, test his ability at surviving first with Monty, then his ability to learn. Yes, master, said Rabbit replied, bowing. During that time I'll look around the city with you, he added, looking at Aruka. Is that okay with you? Aruka, who had been up until now a spectator, was surprised at his inclusion in the plans. I don't see why I couldn't, he answered. Good, the animal boss added. Why can't we wait until I'm done with the tests, and we all go together? Naruto said, his tone a little whining. Aruka held back a sigh. Sorry Kit, but we'll probably end up in a bar somewhere, and I don't think you're cleared for alcohol yet. Naruto pouted but didn't argue. As soon as the 2 tallest of the group left, Naruto turned back toward the one dressed as a warrior. So, how are those tests going to be? First, Uzumaki-san, as you have heard, Monty here. The rabbit pointed down to the smallest of the group. We'll test your ability to survive. How? He will fight you. Your goal is not to defeat him but to survive. That's all. No limited techniques. Yes, Uzumaki-san. It will be much more difficult than you expect, I gather. The rabbit paused for a second. Are you ready? Naruto twisted his neck twice in preparation. Sure. Monty. Non-lethal. Go. Said Rabbit blurred. The rabbit crossed the few meters separating them in an eye blink, and saw the 2 weapons bare inches from his face a fraction of a second before reality blinked. Disoriented, the academy student quickly realized what had happened the moment a clone's memories surged in his mind, accompanied by the sound of an uncorking bottle. A clone had switched with him at the last instant, saving his neck. Hearing something rushing towards him, he switched again, this time landing on the farthest pillar from his point of origin. By now the clones had realized what was going and were once again trying to attack in mass, though the only result was the rhythmic sounds of uncorking bottles as said clothes were decapitated. This time he didn't wait, and as soon as he appeared he called out, Raiden, knowing his clones would get the meaning. And they did. A second later 2 many flashes to count filled the room. Naruto was happy to hear that the dreadful popping sound stopped at that instant. And restarted a second later, once again coming closer. Naruto switched while swearing in his head. How did that bunny track him? As soon as he reappeared, The death of a clone gave him a good idea. Sound. Noise. He cried out, right before switching. This time it took a longer for the clones to catch on, but they quickly did. One by one, they all started making noise. Some clapped their hands or stomped the ground. Some started singing, some yelling, some whistling. A few even started telling jokes. The effect, however, was immediate. The rabbit no longer tracked him unerringly, and started eliminating the clones closest to him instead. It then became a stalemate, with Monty eliminating clones as quickly as Naruto created them. After a full minute of this, the samurai rabbit Miyamoto had enough. Monty, stop. As soon as those words were uttered, the small summon was back where he had been originally, as if he'd never moved. Naruto, on his side, switched back before the two rabbits, breathing a little hard. Good enough showing, I suppose, the samurai said. Monty, unmoving, said nothing. Overtaken by curiosity, Naruto couldn't help but ask. Does he talk? He never did, to my knowledge, Miyamoto answered. I am not even sure his true name is Monty. He does answer to it, however. He paused for a second. Can I ask a question? Sure. Why did you not flee using your technique? Survival was the goal, not defeat. This, the blonde needed to ponder. It took him a few moments before he came up with an answer. I didn't really think about the option. My main goal was to deal with his speed and tracking ability. I don't think I could have done that while dodging him in a narrow corridor, he finally replied. A valid answer. Now for the second test. The rabbit paused. Have you been trained in the way of the sword? No. Perfect. Now if you can get something to train with, be it a sword, bakudo, shinai, the samurai enumerated, his eyes closed. The clone closest to the exit disappeared for a second, only to reappear a few seconds later beside Naruto loaded with dozens of sword-like weapons. Sheath, a thin plank, a cane, even a branch would do. He finished, finally looking at Naruto, who was in the process of selecting a katana. Miyamoto choked a little. Those will be fine, I think. Now take your sword like this, he instructed, demonstrating with his own sword. And take this position. Monty, still looking, stood there silently. The summon named Nanabo had not lied. He'd entered the first bar Iruka had pointed out and had gotten them a private booth. He had been helped by the fact that he'd hidden his natural appearance under a genjutsu that, to the Chunin's eyes, was flawless. He was now, outside his gray hair and eyes, a totally forgettable person. He'd ordered a strawberry liqueur for himself, while Iruka took a simple Konoha beer. As soon as they received their orders, the bunny leader stepped up. Now that we have drink, let's get to the real reason we're here. Which is, I want you to describe me your student, Naruto. Why me? You could have asked him. Yes, but a herd knows its members well. A friend knows even better. A person might underplay or overplay his own abilities, but a real friend would not. So, tell me about this boy who wants to summons the rabbits. Well, how could I describe him? He's someone very friendly and energetic. And loyal also. He tends, however, to be very lonely, and keeps his emotions to himself. He's much brighter than he looks, and can think outside the box at the best of times. Iruka was ticking down fingers. Sadly, he's not one for the usual school environment, and I have much difficulty having him focus on his classes. Between that and his pranking, he makes the academy interesting, to say the least. So he's a prankster, the rabbit said, smiling. The Chunin did not notice, stuck in reminiscence. The very worst. Not a month ago he painted graffiti over the carving of the previous Hokages, he pointed out. Over the face of your leaders. Yes. Bwahahaha. Nanabo couldn't help himself and laughed heartily. He can see he's a handful. Yes. Apart from that, the academy teacher became more reticent. He hasn't really been treated properly. How come? Well, he's an orphan. And no one cared enough to adopt him. He's been alone since forever, and doesn't make friends easily. Iruka was silent after that, not wanting to get into dangerous territory. It seemed, however, to be painting a good enough picture for the Rabbit King. That's all fine and good, but there's one thing missing. What's the link between him and foxes? Nanabo wasted no time unrolling it, and after a few meters he had a blank spot handy to place in front of Naruto. Now, to sign this scroll and confirm your contract with the rabbits, you need to place a handprint in blood of each of your hands on the paper, then to write down your name the same way below them. What's with the other names? They're all smudged and unreadable. That's what happens when a summoner dies, the rabbit leader answered. The scroll is special and keeps the blood fresh, but it's the user's chakra that keeps the blood legible. Meaning that upon a summoner's death, the blood runs and makes its signature impossible to read. Cutting open his own palm with a kunai, Naruto used the blood there to wet his hands. That means there isn't any other rabbit summoner left, right? Right. Naruto wasted no time placing the handprints and writing down his name, knowing from experience that the cut he had made wouldn't bleed for long. As soon as he was done, Nanabo re-rolled the scroll for storage and handed it to its original carrier, which disappeared as soon as it was back in place. Miyamoto, Monty, we will be leaving also, the elder summon said. Miyamoto nodded, bowed, and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Turning to Naruto, Nanabo smiled. I expect you to summon me again in a week to see how much you improved, partner. He handed Naruto his paw with a grin. Naruto shook it gratefully. I will, partner, he said, smiling. Take good care of my grandson, then. And then he too vanished. Monty then followed suit an instant later. Naruto turned to Aikibo in a flash. Grandson. Sorry we're late, said the two clones disguised as civilian children. They quickly took their places around the council table. Good, the original ninja exclaimed, clapping his hands together. Aikibo, standing upon Naruto's head, was looking around confusion. Now we can begin. As you know from various clone memories, this little guy is Aikibo, one of the rabbit summons, and the newest part of our council. Aikibo, this is the prank council, the group where we Narutos plan and decide upon what should be done. And this works with all of you being the same person? Aikibo asked, visibly confused. You'll see, replied the Bunshin known as Murmuru. So, now that we're all there. Status report. I've finished both furnishing my place and buying the remaining ninja supplies we don't have in abundance, Arika said, showing her kunoichi outfit as proof of her words. I also have 3 clones currently studying the required book, since my cover includes being better on the theoretical side than the other 2. Good. Good, Murmuru. I unfortunately haven't started on studying, but I've been given today the apartment I'll be using while in the academy. The group nodded. Some second-hand stuff has also been delivered to me by the Chunin who tested me. Mostly old ninja stuff. I'll be going through it as soon as I go back out. Okay, how about you two? Naruto asked, pointing to the 2 civilian latecomers. Not as good on our side. We entered Konoha late today and haven't managed to find the person holding the deed for the shop we've been thinking of using, the female copy answered. The 2 other clones are also busy filling the various papers we need to live in Konoha legally. How come none of the others had to fill such papers? One of the clones looking like Naruto asked. Personally, I believe that those are part of the documents Iruka and that other teacher, Kiratori, filled for us, the Naruto disguised as a civilian boy replied. There's also quite a bit of red tape added with the various permits for shopkeepers and traders being involved. I guess that means you've decided on what names to use, correct? The real Naruto asked, looking in turn toward each of the civilians. Yup, I'm Jisei Kumori, the female one said. And I'm her brother, Jisei Kokue. Our father is Jine and our mother, Aine, her brother continued. Perfect. Kokue, Kumori, remember to update everyone via clone about this selection. The 2 nodded while Naruto went on. The fact that you guys are not up to schedule isn't that bad, your placement isn't as time sensitive as the one of the 2 ninja Bunshin. Now, unless there's an emergency, this will be the last council meeting before the academy opens. So, We need to make sure everything is as perfect as we can make it. We can't be meeting every day as we did before or it'll draw too much attention. The whole council nodded. So, first thing, techniques. I'd like your opinion on what we should focus on, the real academy student asked. You think we have a good enough mastery of the chakra shield, one of the undisguised clones said. I have to agree, another added. We need to at least have a few others working on new jutsu. Let's put it to the vote, the original concluded. The vote was unanimous, and further bargaining split the clones' training in half, with one continuing work on the shielding technique while the other would go back to the 5 remaining elemental jutsu they'd originally selected. Okay, one down. Second point, the clones outside. We need at least one person to take care of that. That includes everything. Maps, numbers, what we can buy and sell, etc. I won't be able to take care of that, since I'll be back to the academy soon, so I'd like for volunteers. 3 of the clones raised their hands. Good. Then I'm leaving that in your hands. We'll expect a report at the next meeting, though, the female civilian added. No prob, the first of the 3 replied, while the others nodded. Last thing then, Naruto continued. Aikibo, that's you. Said Rabbit jumped down to the council table. What can I do for you, Naruto? I've been thinking and I think you should go with Arika for the classes. Why? I'd much rather stay with the real you. I know, but the fact is, when classes start, if you stay with me, I'll need to explain your presence. Naruto sighed, clearly unhappy with the fact. And I can't. You're visibly not from Konoha and, as an academy student and orphan, I'm not supposed to have been far outside the village. The council nodded sadly. Arika, though, can explain your presence as something your father bought you as an acceptance present or something. Aikibo hit the table twice with a paw. That's only starting with the academy, right? Right. Then okay, but I'm staying with the real you until then. The rabbit rose to stand on his 2 hind paws. I meant what I said earlier. I'm staying by you. He then jumped straight into Naruto's hair. Fine by me, he said with a smile. He then looked around the table at the various clones present. If there isn't anything else. Rising, the various bunchins shook their heads in answer. Then this meeting is done. The council will meet again after the first day of school. He concluded while putting his seat back into place. The various Narutos each went back to their own work.